Hello everyone and welcome to Phoenix Gaming. I'm Nick Henning and we are here again to tackle another game. We're talking about Dune Imperium today, and while this was also the grand final, I'm actually ramping up by looking at the Dune Imperium ring final. So all these players are pretty experienced Dune Imperium players. They've already won 2 games in a row in order to be here. Every single player at this table knows this game better than I do. I have played Dune Imperium 2 times. It was 2 years ago. I relearned the rules of it for this tournament. And yeah, my friends are a big fan. Actually, Sceadeau, who is in the top left seat here, is one of the people that has been trying to convince me that Dune Imperium is worthy of more plays. So it's going to be a little bit different today because we are going to try to get into this game not really knowing as much. And so we're going to be sort of trying to discern the board state and ascertain the board state. Maybe our strategic commentary, which we'll input, is not going to be as insightful, but we'll see. Maybe it'll be fun. And if you're new to Dune Imperium like I am, this actually might even be a much better video for you to get engaged with. I did review the cards in advance here, so hopefully I can tell for the most part what things are as things go along, and we'll see. I might have to pause a couple times. I'll also say in advance, this is probably going to be a 2-parter video because I do have my friend coming by. We're going to spend the night together, but that sounds very romantic. But I've got about an hour here, so let's get started. And if I need to do this in 2 parts, we can totally do that. I think it's going to be just fine, is what I've learned. So one thing that's unique, I actually don't know if this is the rule of the game, is that the players are drafting their leaders in reverse player order. Maybe that is actually the rules of the base game. But Gray is going last, and Joon is going first. Joon, I apologize. I'm not actually sure how your name is spelled. I tried to look up online how Joon is spelled, and there were a lot of different spellings. And so I took my best guess, and I really apologize for not, I didn't know where else to find the answers for this. But I did want to make sure that I was representing yellow, my favorite color, on the board here in the Chiron, so everyone knows who I'm talking about. So Joon's going first, had last pick and took Duke Leto Atreides, who's good at taking the green actions at the top of the board with a mild discount, and also can use Spice to move up in those allegiances or alliances on the left side of the board where they are behind other players. That's their signet ring ability. Paul can always look at the top card of his deck, and his signet ring ability is draw a card. Helena lets players move to specific locations even if other players are there. No kind of worker placement blocking. But the signet ring, I believe, is considered to be the really good ability, which allows you to reserve a card from the top of the board that you want to purchase. And that's kind of the ability to claim one of the more powerful cards that is there. And then Gray, who's in the 4th seat, is playing Baron Harkonnen. I've been told that Baron Harkonnen and Helena are the best, so no terrible surprise that they're the first 2 drafted there. Baron Harkonnen, once per game, basically gets to advance on 2 of the allegiance tracks on the left when he puts 4 troops out. The only thing is that Gray has to make that claim now and play around essentially what this plan is that he's made. And then the ring power allows him to spend a money to get one of those intrigue cards, which I think are quite good in this game, just because of the mystery. People don't really know where you're at. There's a lot of visible information, but the intrigue cards can just generate the fear in people in a way that makes sort of a unique situation for folks here. And everyone just starts off with their water here. Joon is going to go ahead and pay that water to grab this Fremen space. Freeman? I think it's Fremen. I'm not a big Dune fan either, so I really try to read the books, but I'm not, I really loved reading when I was a kid, but I'm just not at the same level as I used to be. And gets to garrison 2 troops and then push up to 4 troops into battle, and Joon goes for the full Monty, pushing all 4 out there, which seems like a lot right off the bat. That's definitely a big sort of claim. Like, I want that victory point at the beginning of the game. Fear me. And I kind of respect the strength of that play. It is risky going first because if other players want to kind of sneak in behind you, but now players have no intrigue cards, so they have the fewest opportunities to be tricky. And instead they will basically have to kind of like duke it out with you directly. So I actually kind of really like this strong lead here of a quick claim of a victory point is what Joon is trying to do, because that's what that conflict is there. Sceadeau just goes and picks up some spice with his water. You notice that the players have used their water pretty quickly, so the spaces that require water have dried up. And Ron is going to do the opposite. He's also going to kind of ally with the Fremen here. And I can't quite tell what cards it is that they're playing, but if you're not familiar with the Dune mechanic, you have 5 cards in it's a deck building worker placement game. You have 5 cards in your hand at the beginning of every turn, and when you send out a worker, you need to play a card, and the card needs to have the appropriate picture on it to allow you to send troops out. This is interesting because Ron basically says, okay, I've gone to this Fremen space. I haven't garrisoned any more troops, but I'll push 2 more into play. And, if he ends up getting second place here, $2 and an intrigue card is I think, probably a pretty good trade for 2 workers. You can see that you can get... Intrigue cards are kind of sparingly distributed across the board. I think the easiest is if you look at that Ben Gesserit, that purple... row on the left side of the board. An action there allows you to draw a card for a whole action. So, and then there's a whole action that takes $2. So essentially the $2 and an intrigue card is the equivalent of 2 actions worth of things. So surely garrisoning 2 troops is not quite, or spending 2 troops is not that big of an expense to take a second place there. Gray there is using that, I think it's called Diplomacy, the card in your starting deck, and you can see those sort of icons on the left side that say, hey, you're allowed to go to those spaces on the left side of the board. So he's taking that, I believe it's the Empire, or Sardukar, Shark Emperor, the Shark Emperor at the top there to collect some money, money being kind of the primary vehicle for getting those green actions at the top that build your engine, allow you to get another worker, or get more influence every turn if you're sitting on the High Council. Joon goes ahead and claims a single spice, which to me doesn't seem like a very exciting action. I suspect it's just one kind of based on the cards that are available in hand, and I think 1 spice maybe opens up a few choices, but my guess is that it's more of a reaction of what the limitations were in hand. As I've mentioned before, I actually know Sceadeau personally, and so I'm not terribly surprised to see him take this space. He's told me that that deck management is really, really important, so he spends the 2 spice that he picked up to immediately trash a card out of his deck and draw 2 more, which is going to give him a bigger buy turn this turn, because he's got those extra cards, and he's removed one of the worst cards. I can't quite see what it is, and I did watch this through, but I didn't kind of memorize all these things, and not every one of them was commented on, so we're not going to get all the details here. And wow, Ron makes a really aggressive play here by basically pushing the battle issue. That really sucks for Joon. I assume that means that Ron's feeling pretty confident about kind of scooping first place here. Otherwise, you'd kind of keep those 2 employees behind. I imagine that he also sort of had limited options in what action he could take. He doesn't really have money to go on the green spaces, so he's going to go on one of the blue spaces, almost all of which say kind of garrison troops and put people into the battlefield. So he might have sort of been limited by his choices there. I don't know if he had one of those triangle cards, the yellow triangles that lets you go in the upper right, where he could have maybe scooped $3, or if people value that action. I'm the kind of player that just loves acquiring resources at the beginning of the game, so I can't help but wonder if that would be the kind of choice I would make here. So I'm very curious about his willingness to contest that combat pretty heavily. And hey, apparently that space is good, because Greg went ahead and took it. So he's now claimed an additional $5 this turn, which is pretty huge. Sorry, I'm trying to take a look at his intrigue card. Looks like it's one that has 2 options on it. One of them is spend spice. I'm sure someone with a lot more experience could tell what it is, but not a combat card is pretty much all I know, and not an end game card, which I think are very, very rare in those intrigue cards. But he got that off of his ring power from the Baron. And yeah, like I said, he's got the 5 extra which is going to let him next turn jump on the High Council or pick up a few more bucks to get essentially that Sword Master, that extra action here. And Joon picks up Duncan, who I think seems like a totally fine, solid card. My understanding is that generally like buying one card is stronger in this game. Ooh, Sceadeau goes straight for that Opulence card. Let's go back a second so we can look at maybe both Duncan and Opulence. Let's talk about it. All right, here we go. So we're going to pause here so we can assess these cards. So you got 10 cards in your deck, right? And this is a very slow deck building game. I think the game usually plays over like 7 or 8 turns. So if you got a 10 card deck, you got to figure you're going through your 10 card deck. Let's say it's 8 turns. Every 2 turns, you're going to draw 5. So in the 8-round game, you're going to draw through your deck 4 times. And the first time is just your starter deck. So cards that you're buying, you're going to be able to play maybe 3 more times. Maybe more if you've thinned your deck, maybe less if you get unlucky or the way the deck reshuffles and you draw your cards and blah, 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 blah. But I think that's a pretty good baseline of just reading these cards. And of course, when you pass, the cards in your hand that you did not use to put into play, if you're not so familiar with Dune Imperium, say essentially what bonuses you get on them. If you look at the cards at the top, on the bottom, it shows you what you get when you pass. So for instance, that card on the right, the Guild Administrator, gives you 1 extra influence or 1 buying power. So we can't see what cards Joon passed with, but we did see her go on to the 8, which meant she had no additional swords. And so the 3 cards that she had added up to 4, I'll probably call them dollars, even though they're influence, 4 influence that allowed her to purchase Duncan there. So Duncan only lets you go on those blue spaces, which is not that great. Spending a water for drawing a card and garrisoning a troop seems pretty legit. I think drawing cards in this game is solid, although I think water is really hard to come by thematically, as you would expect from Dune. So it might be that this card's really more for its bottom ability, which is when you pass, is going to add 2 to her military strength and give her that precious water. Sceadeau, on the other hand, looks like he goes and grabs Opulence. Very expensive. That's at 6, and that's kind of the benefit that he gets for having those 2 extra cards in his hand that he planned for this turn. And when he plays it, it'll give him $3, so basically an action all in and all of itself, and he can go onto the Emperor spaces up in the top left there, so he can get a bunch of cash all at once. And if he passes with Opulence, it looks like it gives him 1 influence or 1 buying power and the ability to convert 6 cash into a victory point. Now, I don't really know how great that conversion is, but I know that, you start at 1 point in this game, you need 10 to win. So I'm going to assume that's actually kind of amazing. So I can definitely see why he went ahead and picked that up. Looking at those other options up there, I mean, that Scout card gives you some options about where to play on Dune itself, but it doesn't give you any special abilities, and its passing card is like so-so. I suspect that card's really weak. It's just kind of like as good as any of the starting cards in your deck. Guild Administrator seems really cool to me. It gives you the ability to trash a card and go over to that spacing guild, which is important for that highliner, I know, like just dropping tons of troops all at once. Of course, you need all the spice to make that work. And then that Spice Smuggler's card, I guess also lets you move up on the spacing guild if you pay them the spice, but they don't give you a ton of great action place options. Second Scout there, looks like they're really going to kind of clog up the board here. And then really unfortunately for Joon, Ron has the 2 daggers in hand kind of on the bottom of his cards there. Literally daggers. I was just, I just say like daggering people, but literally daggers that are going to make him win that combat. So she's going to get a totally solid, I think, second place reward for the beginning of the game, but tough to see that early victory point, I think, go away. And Ron will take that card that lets him trash something, so I'm glad to have interpreted that correctly. Fremen Camp here is funny to me because it doesn't actually allow you to go to Fremen spaces. I think that's really, really funny. That's a card that looks like it's good at passing to me because I know that 2 influence is pretty respectable. the best card in your starting deck, I believe, has 2 influence. Although it might be that Gray here does not have enough money to buy that. Looking at the cards that he's passed with, he might have 2 daggers in hand, so he might really just have 1 influence and may actually not be buying anything for his deck. So he basically just really was focused on his action, his round of getting a bunch of money and sort of leaving it at that. So, of course, we know nothing. So, we don't really have a sense of where anything is going at the end of the first round. But Joon, I think, got a little bit stuffed by not getting the victory point that Ron kind of snuck away and had to pay quite a lot of troops for that second place position, which is sort of a bummer for her. And then I think, taking the 1 spice seems like fine, but not amazing. I'm realizing now why she took the 1 spice. It's so that she can use the signet ring. That totally explains all of it. And then did she move up? I must have missed it. She used that space to essentially move up the Emperor track with the signet ring. That's actually really clever. Use the yellow triangle on the signet ring to go get the spice, spend the spice because that's the signet ring's rule, to go up where Gray is on the Emperor track. It's a shame that I missed that when we were going through. Cool. So that's seems like a fine, solid turn for Joon. Sceadeau made his deck a lot better, right? He trashed a card and he bought a very expensive card. So in terms of the deck building aspect, he's a step ahead of the other players. Ron picked up a victory point, so there he goes, 11% of the way to victory. That seems pretty exciting. And then he picked up a card that allows him to trash, so that seems fine, I suppose. And then Gray just collected a ton of cash. He's really going for that engine building side of the game. And here we see Sceadeau is collecting money. I assume that the big ones are worth 5, which makes me assume that he drew Opulence off the top, which is pretty sweet. He drew through a lot of his deck and trashed some of his deck, so he had a decent chance of drawing it. That being said, it certainly is on the luckier side to have your Opulence at the top of your deck rather than somewhere else. Ron's going to take the opportunity to grab that extra spice. All these desert places acquire additional spice over time, and he's the player that took 2 water. Now that I'm seeing that, I can absolutely see why he would have grabbed that second water last turn, because he was already planning to grab the 4 spice there, knowing that no one else could really contest it. And the conflict this turn is just money. So it's the kind of thing where if you wander somewhere with swords, I feel like you'd push a troop out. But of course, Ron committed last turn to fighting, so he didn't have any extra troops to push out, even though going onto those desert spaces, if you look kind of in the bottom right corner of the picture, you see the crossed swords, which says that they're allowed to go out there. So that's cool. That's clever. I mean, clearly the players here have a sense they're moving very quickly to my untrained eye at the beginning here. They have a sense of what the kind of strong actions are at the beginning of the game, what they can do with it. And Gray is pulling up to the front that card. This is I think a card that you can use one time to go to any of the action spaces on the left, but then you've got to trash it. That's in your starting deck. So I'd say your starting deck is 10 cards, but it actually very quickly becomes 9 cards if you don't buy anything else, which gets really interesting when you go to draw and you have a 9-card deck. So, right, because the second time you draw, you shuffle your discard pile. So it can make it really matter what the top half of your deck is, depending on what you're doing. And Gray will go ahead and grab some water, I guess, to keep his options open. Throws a couple troops out there. I think I would definitely throw at least 1 troop out there because you get a couple bucks, and I suppose that 2 just puts a little bit more pressure on there if Joon takes an action where she can push a troop out, but can't actually... She can push a troop out, but can't actually add more cubes. That way, Gray's going to beat her out. And I suppose $2 does seem like it is worth more than a cube. I think probably cubes are worth about $1-ish, I would say, based on what I can see on the board and having no experience. Joon goes ahead and had a bunch of money, in part because of the second place of the battle last turn. and goes ahead and goes up to the High Council up there, which I think is really a nice spot to get on the second turn of the game. That's going to allow her to buy extra things, that extra 2 influence every turn. That being said, the card row is a little crappy right now. That's not the most exciting time to have 2 extra influence, but I'm sure she will find a way to make good use of it. And Sceadeau actually really clearly respects the value of money as much as Gray does. The both of them have really kind of pushed all in on money, and that makes sense for Sceadeau because he's got the opulence, right? Essentially, that 6 coins there at some point in the game can turn into a victory point. So it's a victory point for him, if absolutely nothing else. And we see that the action he took, those blue actions, there's a couple of them that give you resources, but he chose to draw through his deck. I assume that the idea is that churning through his deck faster is going to get him to draw more of his opulence card. Like wants to take advantage of the fact that his deck is better than other people's right now. It's only 1 card, but it's still better, right? And so that's the way that you kind of get ahead, is you find your little advantages in this kind of game, and you press that button. Whew. Okay, so Ron has a pile of spice right now. I assume he just took it for the having a pile of spice aspect of it. I wonder if he'll go the same kind of path as Sceadeau and trash a card from his deck with the Bene Gesserit. He can then trash another card from his deck with the Administrator later, and kind of make sort of like a very skinny, draw your best cards kind of deck. But maybe he really wants to save that spice for a big Highliner turn. I think the Highliner space, that's one of those spacer ones, costs 6, and that Administrator that he has lets him go there. So it might just be good to have a spice in his back pocket so he can kind of just come in and win a game along the way. And he does go to a Bene Gesserit spot, but he basically just claims an intrigue card instead, which I think by far seem like the hardest things in this game to evaluate to my relatively untrained eye. And you're seeing folks do this sort of like get a single garrison troop and other action a fair amount. I think that's essentially because of like the limitations of the cards they have in their hand. Your sort of alliance cards, there are only so many of them, and you're kind of limited in your choices otherwise. So I see that for Gray, who then basically goes and just continues to make Sceadeau's life a little bit harder, as they really kind of push in quite a fair amount of troops here for that money. So both of those players really valuing that. I think that Gray, with his $5, deciding not to go to the High Council, he's getting the money, and he's planning on picking up a swordsman on his 3rd turn so he can have his 3rd action. I think one of the really clever things, by the way, about Dune Imperium, is probably my favorite aspect of this game, is the idea that getting a 3rd worker in most worker placement games is like a no-brainer. But in this one, you have to use a card to play it. So you'll be ending the turn with only 2 cards instead of 3 cards in hand, assuming, of course, you don't draw any extra, which decreases your purchasing power. So you really need that 3rd worker to be doing a fair amount of work. And it costs 8 money to put that person into play. So I do really like what they've managed to do with the 3rd worker in a worker placement game. Sceadeau picks up a cheap Bene Gesserit card. I don't know what it does, but neither does Gray, so I don't feel so bad about it. He puts it into his discard pile. And we're probably going to go into this round of quick purchases here. To me, that Bene Gesserit Initiate seems pretty solid. You don't get to go on one of the spaces on the left, but she can go anywhere else and draws you another card from your deck. That to me seems very, very respectable. And we see that Ron has like revealed some intrigue card there along, so maybe he's got some extra cash as well. Unfortunately, because of the way the board's laid out here, I do really appreciate how WSBG, by the way, they are commenting underneath me, so I am covering them again. Sorry, Chris. They expanded out that card row at the top there, but it's hard to see when the players are buying things that are not at the card row. So I'm curious if Ron had enough money to buy like one of the sort of generic cards. I guess if he bought Spice Must Flow, which is the one that costs 9, he would have a victory point. So we can know for sure when he does that. And Gray's going to go ahead and pick up that card that I mentioned. So feeling really validated here, guys, especially Gray seems to be simpatico with what I'm thinking here. That Smuggler's Thopter, I can't quite read the text there, but I think it wants you to have some influence with the Spacers already, or Spacing Guild already, to let you draw some cards. So currently that's an option for Joon and also Ron, who we know has a Spacer card in his deck. That seems kind of interesting to them. Joon, I think, just used a generic card to head out there, but now she's got the Fold Space, so she can, in the future, essentially take another Spacing Guild action at her leisure if she does want to pick up that Smuggler's Thopter. It looks like both Sceadeau and Gray forgot to set their combats when they ended their turn, because I think they both did purchases, so they both finished their turns there. My guess is that they just have the default 6 and 8. Like, we actually already know that Gray used his 2 daggers last turn, and my guess is that Sceadeau removed a dagger, because my impression is that daggers are the weakest in the deck. And they're catching it here. Okay, I nailed it. What a good guess. I'm on fire so far with everything except for knowing the nuanced details of what's going on. I don't think that Sceadeau has any intrigue cards, so this is going to be sort of like a free win for Gray at this point. I mean, not free, put 4 resources in to do that. And so both Sceadeau and Gray are essentially turning in a troop for something close to a gold and a half. And Joon purchases the Fremen camp to convert spice into troops, or to just pass and get a bunch of money, which seems respectable, and flips this like monster card. I mean, it costs 6. It's a lot of influence by the Reverend Mother, and she just has, a great passing option. I believe that her top ability is really good if you have other Bene Gesserit cards, and Sceadeau did just pick up a Bene Gesserit card, so I'm sure that he is pretty eager to see that. Unfortunately, he's going to be the last player in the next round, so there's no real assumptions that he's going to be the one to get any of that stuff. And one of the things I really like about this spice building up mechanic is all of a sudden those desert spaces there for 0 or 1 water are suddenly like very spicy. Because they get that extra value. So someone is probably going to be claiming those this turn. I know spice is pretty valuable. As they are wrapping up the second round here, I am actually going to go ahead and take a pause. My friend, you might have heard my beep beep earlier, is headed my way. So I'll have to do the next much larger chunk of this when I come back. But some brief thoughts at the end of round 2. I have absolutely no idea who's doing well. Gray has collected a lot of money, is clearly setting up for, I think, a swordsman play, and we'll see what he can do with the 3 actions. Joon has kind of, I think, danced around a little bit in terms of going up on the tracks and just getting some like good value options here and there. Sceadeau has been very focused on deck building and then also getting money. He also might be looking at a swordsman, but if he's going last in the round, like maybe he's going to hop onto the High Council. And Ron has more victory points and has a bunch of spice in hand, and so I'm sure he's got some plans. But there isn't anything that I think to me says one player is very obviously the threat at this stage. There's just a lot of game left at this point. And we'll go ahead and stop there at the flipping of the conflict card. See you soon. All right, and we are back to do the latter half of this latter 3/4 of Dune Imperium here. So this looks like it is a battle for something basin, which I don't know the board enough to know which of those 3 spaces it is. I'm going to guess that the basin is in the desert. So I think what this is, winning this is a victory point and kind of ownership of that right yellow triangle space on the planet Dune itself, which would give a person an additional spice in the future. And we see Ron kick off here by just going ahead and claiming that exact space that we were just talking about, because 2 spice for no cost is just a very, very good ratio. We saw that he was willing to pay 2 water for 4 spice, so why not pay no water for 2 spice? And then he took that Bene Gesserit leader, the Reverend Mother. I guess he played his ring card and took her straight off the board. We can't have this nonsense, he says. And I wonder if he's going to be able to afford it, or if that's just like a straight up hate draft. Given that the board, the options that are available there don't necessarily look so sexy, my guess is that it's a straight up hate draft, but hard to say. Gray here goes ahead and claims the swordsman, as we'd kind of anticipated. I do think that this means that Sceadeau is very likely to take that high council seat. I don't know that Ron has the money to do that, but I guess Gray does. I'm trying to tell if those are single dollar pieces he has, or if he has 2 $5 pieces. I guess he would have to have been insanely rich to have 18 money for a swordsman and 13 money for a swordsman and a high council, but maybe he has gotten a lot of money this game. I wish I had a better sense, but oh well. One of the things that's interesting about this game and sort of commenting on this game is that because we can't see the player's hands, we don't really get to kind of know what their limitations are. So in most worker placement games, you can go anywhere. But because this worker placement game has that unique aspect of your cards tell you where you can go, it's a little bit harder to kind of make judgments about where players are at in terms of the strength of their plays. Joon here goes ahead and takes one of those blue, we'll call them outer planet locations, in order to put a troop into play and then push her 2 troops out into the field there, which I think makes sense. I mean, it's a pretty, no one has any troops garrisoned, so there's a good chance that you can win first pretty easily here. Sceadeau clearly has the same thought, depending on what other cards you have, or your intrigue cards. And then worst case scenario, converting those 2 warriors into 2 water, for getting second place seems like a completely fine consolation prize along the way there. And we see again, Sceadeau is just very much valuing that card draw, those options, that flipping through the deck. I think again, sort of like running towards opulence as much as possible, since he has that best card in his deck compared to other folks. Ron here is now sitting on, we can't see because me, and then even if I was out of the way, my predecessors in commentating would be blocking his resources. But if we remember correctly, he's got 6 spice now, so he can highliner into any battle he wants to, which I don't know if Joon or Sceadeau were considering that when they pushed their 2 troops out there. Actually, now that I'm saying it, I'm realizing that this would be the turn. I would be certainly nervous. He's expressed multiple times that he's in, and there we go, that he's into the idea of winning combats. And so he's going to go ahead and make this pile of troops. And here's one of the curious things about all games that have this sort of commitment to the pot in bidding, because that's really what the conflict is in this game. It's bidding, right? I'm willing to bid this number of resources, but you have to pay them no matter what. And how much are you willing to commit to the pot, or how much are you willing to pay or overpay to sort of secure things without worrying about players' intrigue cards or things like that getting in the way here? And there's this dynamic that Ron is additionally motivated to win combats now because Sceadeau and Joon are in there. So if he can bump both of those players down a tier in the reward system, it's worth more than it normally would be for him to engage in combat, right? If you're the first person there, and if you end up being the only person there, the ideal situation is that you've only committed 1 troop. But being the first person there, there's this first mover disadvantage where you don't know about folks who are going to show up later. And then, Ron, now being a player who is showing up later, says, yeah, I'm going to come in and I'm going to over trump the 2 of you. I'm going to shove in 4 people, leaving 1 behind. I assume that communicates, what that communicates to me is that Ron wants to ensure that he wins this battle, and that he probably has an okay battle intrigue card in his hand. to ensure that happens if he has to, but he'd rather not use it. That's my interpretation, and maybe I'm just making up an entire narrative here, but that's where we're at. We see that Gray just does some fold spacing right there. I assume that he's not really on the Bene Gesserit. He is on the Fremen track, but maybe he doesn't need the resources there, and he is on the Emperor track, but maybe he doesn't. Well, he definitely doesn't need the money anymore. And I assume that part of his decision-making has something to do with what his master stroke is going to look later, like as Baron Harkonnen. Joon goes ahead and collects some money. I suspect for just doing other actions. She's already on the High Council, and it might be getting to the point in the game where buying the Sword Master is just worth more money than it's worth at that point. So I'm not too sure that she is interested in doing that. Sceadeau uses some of his many resources to claim that Mentat card there. I again assume that part of the reason he's doing that is because he's digging for his other cards, or collecting a bunch of cards to have a lot of money to buy something in particular. Sorry, not money. I shouldn't call it money because there's money. To have a lot of influence to buy a particular card, maybe even a Spice Must Flow. Even though it's a little bit early in the game to clog up your deck, you can really never say no, I think, to victory points when you're only looking for 9 of them over the course of the game. So there you see Gray's playing his third card, and that's what I was talking about before with, like, he's only going to have 2 cards at the end of the round there. And yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to take that spice spot there. The only reason I think you'd maybe want to leave it uncontested and allow it to acquire more spice is Ron went first this turn, which means Gray is going first next turn. And it would be pretty cool for that spot to have 4 spice on it, and Gray would be the first player to capitalize on it. But if that's not the first action that he wants to take next turn, it might not be worth it to him to do that. Joon quickly snaps up power play there to allow her to have some options for essentially jumping into the lead of one of those tracks. If you're not familiar, power play is play on a track, trash this card, and then move 2 spaces up said track. Pretty nice way to just straight up get to that victory point tier if you're already at the bottom, or to jump up into contention or the lead for those top alliance tokens, which I believe just give you a point that can be contested, but you also get an additional bonus every time you hop up there. You know, you get the 2 troops up with the Emperor and 3 money of the Spacers and yada, yada, yada. And Joon is currently spread out across the tracks, largely up 1 on all of them, except for Bang. That's right. Sorry. And looks like Joon revealed 1 sword, which is going to be a bummer for Sceadeau if he doesn't have any swords available in his hand. He's really kind of prioritized that influence in the bottom of his cards rather than anything else. Sending 2 troops to get a 3rd water would be pretty disappointing, be it either for him or for Joon. And he takes a pretty basic action to garrison a troop and get an influence. So he really must have just the difference of getting that 1 more must be something. And my guess is he's pushing for that 9 so he can buy that victory point with the Spice Must Flow. Because I don't see much else that he would be so eager that he's chasing additional influence in this moment. And I'm a little surprised, I think. I'd be curious, like, why he didn't go to the High Council to get those 2 influence there, because he has the money. So my guess is that he's going to drop $6 for opulence, I would have to say. Looks like Gray maybe picked up that Smuggler's Thopter. He did move up on the Spacing Guild there, and whether he has plans to move up again with the Fold Space. I actually wonder if that's why he grabbed that Fold Space card, figuring, hey, you know, two steps here is a victory point, which is totally fine. I think doing that across all 4 tracks is completely reasonable. And then I'll grab the Smuggler's Thopter to make it even better. And again, if Baron Harkonnen already named Spacer's Guild, he knows he's going to go there another time. So that's possible. Or maybe he's just planning, I guess that the more clever thing is going to the Spacer's Guild with the Highliner and Baron Harkonnen being on Emperor and Fremen would be a pretty nice thing for Gray in this moment here. So Sceadeau is passing, and we can't quite see what he passed with, unfortunately. But this is, I think, where he's deciding how he's spending his money. Trying to see, we can kind of see up in the top left there. And I guess we'll just have to make the call based off of his victory points. I assume one way or another he's making victory points right now, right? He's either buying a Spice Must Flow for the 9 influence, or he's spending. Oh, he already did spend 6 money to do his opulence, so that's why he's moving up a point there. So if we see that he gets another point, basically he spent this turn acquiring 2 points through economic means. Yeah, that makes sense. And we do see that he passed with no daggers, so probably going to be in 3rd place there, which is a little bit of a bummer. I think Ron's Highliner came in and really did a lot of work there. Although I wonder, I mean, he had the opportunity to put troops out. Does it make sense in this game to say, no, you know what, I'm not going to. I'm just going to save them for the future? Because most of the time when you put troops out, you can only push a little bit extra into the pot, right? You can only push +2 into the pot. So saving 2 people behind is really the maximum that you need to save from turn to turn to have that influence. I guess 4 if you're planning on taking 2 military actions, but that doesn't seem too efficient. I wish it was easier to see what he's grabbing. Yes, okay. All right, so he is buying a Spice Must Flow. This card that he's looking at, I don't quite know what it does. It looks like it has women on it, and so I'm going to assume it's a Bene Gesserit card. If they could push it down a little bit more, but I guess it doesn't have any Bene Gesserit stuff on the left side of it, so it might just be maybe it's a genetic something or other, because there's some helix strands there. Yeah, I have no idea what that card does. And I guess he only has the 1 Bene Gesserit card. So I think without having the Reverend Mother, it's not really like on a particular strategy there or anything like that. And then, of course, Ron did pick up that point. So currently, Ron and Sceadeau sitting in the lead at 3 points. But of course, there's a lot of stuff cooking for folks right now. Joon is 3 single steps away from each of them being a point. Gray is in the same spot. Ron is in the same spot. And Sceadeau's a little behind on the alliance side of things, 2 of the steps there. So I guess in a way you could say, just like points that are very clearly on the board, Ron is leading because he's got 3 points and then 3 half points if you want to look at it that way, putting him kind of into first place there. Gray is just over there with sort of this huge engine, right? It's got the Swordmaster, it's got a pile of resources on his board still. Sceadeau has the deck that's bought the most cards, although now Spice Must Flow, I think, is not a very good card to have in your deck. I think it just kind of slows you down a little bit. It's mostly about buying it for that victory point. And Joon's there on the High Council, which is certainly giving her... She kind of seems to have like been doing a little bit of everything, right? She's got her fingers in a lot of pies, a little bit less narrowly focused than the other players, which seems, I think, quite viable in this game, right? Because you can get the points from each of the different tracks. You can get the points from combat, and the game doesn't like give you essentially engine systems that prefer for you to have done a particular kind of strategy or collected this and that cards. I think it gives you little edges, but this is, I think, a little bit more tactical than strategic for the most part. What you're doing from turn to turn is not part of some grand, when I get these, I get such and such bonus and this and that. So it's not it's not the same level of, I think, requirement that goes there. So gray, I think, is leading this turn. Conflict here is get a victory point, as many of these level 2 conflicts seem to be, and then maybe that's trash a card. So, basically a victory point and a little perk. More or less the same kind of conflict as last turn. I think not quite as good. Claiming that location, the basin there, is a nice little perk. Going to pay out probably a spice or 2 by the end of the game. I guess I would say 2 spices by the end of the game if we're on turn 4. Yeah, maybe even 3. It's possible. Probably 2. Let's say 2. All right, so leading with the signet ring here means that gray is going to be able to spend $1 to get a card with Baron Harkonnen, and then also drop spice to collect a bunch of bucks. This is interesting because gray already has a couple dollars, so I assume this means that he's going for full infrastructure and planning on getting on the High Council as well with a future action. And he's just looking around, seeing that the other players don't have the money. Ron has not really collected money at all. Sceadeau just spent his money displaying his fabulous wealth. So yeah, my guess is that gray is planning on getting on that High Council. I'm a little curious about that. And again, these players all have more experience than I do, but it's turn 4. If he does indeed go on the High Council, there's not going to be a lot of turns of where his buying of cards is going to make a big difference. And it's pretty hard for him to get to that 9 for Spice Must Flow because he's playing 3 of his cards every turn for his workers. So it's going to be harder and harder for him to get up to that value. Joon says, I like the military game. I do the military game, and is going to go ahead and convert her money into violence. They're just garrisoned, though. They're not actually deployed yet. She is planning for the long term here. And then Sceadeau is going to go ahead and just collect a bunch of money. It looks like he uses Opulence card, which gives him $3, $2 for going on that space itself as well, and getting a victory point for moving up there to that second level with the Sardaukar Sceadeau, the Scorpion King, and now putting him into first place. I don't know that this game person's current status really matters until they're at the can you cross the threshold? In like Settlers of Catan, which is another game that races to 10, if I'm at 6 points and everyone else is at 3, it also means that my infrastructure is that much larger. And that's not really the case in this game. Your infrastructure and your points are not necessarily integrated with each other, which I think is cool. You can feel very satisfied in what it is that you're doing if you don't have points. And if you're just really kind of pushing towards those points, I think Ron has, you're going to be in a good position anyway. And you're just hoping that other players are not going to be able to essentially pull together a strong enough game plan later on to catch up to you. But there's a lot of points just cooking, right? I think all of these players like Phantom have a few extra points. And the question is sort of how do they play those out? And we see the gray here indeed uses that money acquired from selling that valuable spice on the totally legal universal market, which is going to give him just a lot more options as he's buying cards. I'll be curious to see what he buys with it and where that goes. He's on full infrastructure. He's probably at this point going to be the only player there doing that, because no one else really has the money to go swordsman, and buying a swordsman on turn 5 definitely seems awful. That's almost certainly more than halfway through the game. So I would venture to guess that on Gray did it on turn 3, and that seems reasonable. I suspect that turn 4 is probably the last turn you'd want to be doing Swordmaster in most games. Past that, spend your money elsewhere, my friend. Find something else to do with it, or don't spend all the time getting it. That looks maybe like a fold space card that was used. Maybe not. Going out to contest Ron even more. Joon and Ron seem to always be at odds here. Yeah, I mean, 3 is the option, right? When you go in the space, I think Joon has several intrigue cards, so maybe is feeling comfortable with this combat here, and maybe also has Duncan Idaho in hand. Looks like Sceadeau went for a pretty quick pass there, and maybe use some ability to. Oh, he bought the card that he was considering buying last turn. I see. And then that Sceadeau Scorpion King Legion, I think is a pretty decent card as well. Lets you garrison some troops. I mean, it's better earlier, but folks in this game have certainly demonstrated their willingness and, of course, the value of getting into conflicts here and there. I don't think this is the kind of game where you're supposed to ignore conflicts. If you are, perhaps choose a different game. Ron, I guess, gets the second to last action because Gray has 3 actions here. Pushing extra troops out seems a little feeble at this stage. I mean, obviously he doesn't want to get pushed around by Joon, but it's just unfortunate to have to spend an action to do that. Looks like that is exactly what he's going to have to do in this case. Yep, you get a water, not an intrigue card. I think he's just saying it a couple times for his own sake. Yeah, and I don't know what card he used for that or what his options were, but I think if he had the option to move up one of the tracks on the left, that would have been nicer for him, rather than maybe feeling like he has to contest this fight. And I'm sure, again, he's plugging for that victory point. But this might be a case where the intrigue cards come into play because they are pretty close to each other, with Ron only being up those extra 2. And then Gray says, I don't even want to mess with it. I'm not interested in sacrificing this 1 unit to get a spice. And he goes to draw a card. Now, I assume this must be not must be, because there's not a lot of action spaces left for him. That's one of the things that you need to consider when you are taking something like the Swordmaster, is that it's only going to be what's left over, the dregs at the end, as it were. But he did a card draw where he reshuffled his deck. And it looks to me like he has a couple of his good cards in hand and in play. And that's a weird time to draw a card to reshuffle your deck, because what that means is that at the end of his turn, all those cards are going to go into the discard pile, and then he has to draw all the way through his deck again before he can get back to the good cards. This is something that comes up in a game that I play a lot, Great Western Trail. And so that like, when do you draw an extra card? Like, sometimes it is worth it to have a slightly clumsier action, knowing that you are preventing yourself from reshuffling because you want to put your good cards into your discard pile, but your good cards are still sitting in your hand right now. And that dynamic of when to draw things, I think, is one of those, like, small deck builders, right? This is like a deck builder where your deck's never going to be above, like, I don't know, 15 cards or something like that. Same kind of thing in, Great Western Trail. Like, you're not going to build these, Mondo 40, 50 card Dominion decks. Don't come at me in the comments with those are bad decks, but you can in theory. And that just makes for a different level there. Now, that being said, of course, the extra card gives him money, and he did just buy a seat on the High Council, so maybe he really wants to buy some cards of value. And that one that they just flipped right there, I think, is very good at picking up spice from those action spaces on the board. And that left spice spot is, I believe, going to be up to 5 spice next turn. If you did it with that carrier thing, I think it doubles the base number of spice on the board, so could scoop up a casual 8 spice with that card. Seems like that would be fun. Ron passes. I did not see what he bought. And we do see that Joon did indeed have just a pile of swords available. My guess is that one of them was Duncan, because I think he gives 2 swords. And so her and Ron are tied. Just a very awkward place to be in. If they end up actually legitimately tying, it ends up just hurting both of them. This is a bad game to be tying in. You would have probably rather have left a troop home to get sort of the extra troop in the garrison and let the other person take first place. It depends on the circumstances, but with Ron and Joon, like, Ron might have been okay with Joon scoring another point because she seems a little bit behind on the point scoring side of things. But that being said, I was just talking about how in a game where the points are so tight, so few of them, maybe you just don't give an inch to anybody. It's a tough call. Looks like Sardaukar Legion got scooped up, and Chris Knife comes out, which I think is another not very good card. Doesn't do a ton. It does let you play on Fremen spaces, which I think is can be really valuable, right? Like, it's one of the few places where you can get water on the board, and you notice that Ron there took advantage of the fact that he can go to that one Fremen space. He's the only player that can do that because he's on the second level of the Fremen track and has their alliances with them. There you see the Great Flat has a gazillion spice on it now. I do think it's funny, though, that 5 spice is not quite enough to highliner your way in. But if you have 1, which it looks like both Joon and Gray do, so someone's going to scoop that up this turn, and Joon's got a pile of water over there. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was her first action for this turn. Actually, it looks like all the spice spaces, no one took any of them last turn. And I think that the ratio for like your action to take one of those spice spaces without the accumulation on it is not very good. So you can fall into this pattern that they seem to have fallen into in this game, where it's like, take the spice spaces, don't take the spice spaces, and they'll bounce between that from turn to turn. I really dig Joon's sort of like drawing one card at a time very meticulously and looking at them in the hand. I am a draw them all at once and fan them out kind of person, or I'll count them onto the table and then fan them. Actually, that's really the way that I'll do it more often, something like that. Conflict this turn, not so exciting. I think that is an intrigue card, and 3 spice to the winner and then some spice to the losers. You're really generally looking for that victory point, I would say, with the conflict. So we'll probably see a couple people throwing out some singletons this turn, just in hopes of maybe getting a cheap, easy win. But I don't think that this is going to be a very high conflict turn for the players. Oh, and I didn't quite see what happened with the battle last turn. Did Ron end up taking a point for it? I'm trying to remember how many fights he's had. I think Sceadeau was ahead by a point because I said he went into the lead. I don't think Ron scored a point anywhere else because I don't think he did the Fremen one last turn. So he must have ended up playing an intrigue card that took the battle for him. Well, Joon is thinking about it, so I guess that idea of going to the Great Flat is not necessarily the obvious choice here. Again, she might just not have the yellow triangle card that she wants to play, or maybe she's just planning out her whole turn, like what card she wants to play, how much money she wants to have left over. Being the first player means that you are almost certainly going to be looking at that buy board when it comes back to your turn. short of weird stuff like doing the mentat or someone early passing or something like that. But nope, Joon does as I suggested, which I think makes sense. It's just kind of accumulated the most bang for its buck, and I do like when games have that accumulation mechanic. It's just a nice, clean way to incentivize when folks, want to. How is she getting all those troops? Must have been some intrigue card that she played, because it looks like she's spending some spice out. It must have been an intrigue card that allows her to get a bunch of troops, and then she's going to throw a couple in there. Ooh, she's going to throw a lot in there. That seems like a lot to me for this conflict. This doesn't seem like a super valuable conflict to me. Maybe she's just trying to encourage other people to bug her off and not deal with her. I really don't love sending all of those. That seems like a lot to me. I mean, it really sucks to get second or third place when you've kind of partially committed, but not minimally committed. So maybe she's just kind of doing this show of strength to not have folks mess with her. But it seems expensive. Seems expensive to me. Sceadeau goes ahead and picks up some spice. Maybe he's planning on selling this so he can, again, do his great opulence. Or simply he's just setting up for that famed highliner play. Sure, why not put out the single cube? Try to pick up some free spice along the way. It's kind of taking advantage of when you're taking those sword actions when you get them. The more and more that folks are taking the actions on the left side of the board that don't have the swords, or on the top of the board that don't have the swords, the more it's going to look like that. Here we go. Ron, number 1. One time that he gets that bonus spice. I do think that it is interesting. A lot of games have the sort of, if you have a flag here and your opponents go here, you get a bonus. This game just says, no. If anyone goes here, you get to cash in. Okay, and so interesting. So we see Gray is going for another fold space here. And to me, that says that Gray is just essentially looking to take alliance actions all game long. He for sure is planning on getting 1, 2, 3, 4 of his points from each of the different alliances and guilds and factions on Dune. I wouldn't be surprised, given that Baron Harkonnen is going to give him 2 additional bump ups here, that he's also going to go for one of the 4th level tracks as well. So 5 points that he's looking to accumulate from those alliances. And I think that makes sense. He needs to play catch up somehow with his giant engine. He's got extra actions on other people. He can move up those boards more as long as he has cards that will let him do so. And that's going to open up options for him. Joon also scores a point by moving up the spacing guild track. I wonder why that was her choice in particular. Because she has a fair chunk of spice, which means she's probably highlinering at some point in time. And so I suppose that means maybe doing like a double, like she's looking to get to the top of the spacing guild and kind of take ownership of that. Sceadeau finally puts down some money for the seat on the High Council. Seems a little late for it, but I guess even on turn 5, High Council can be valued by folks. I guess in Sceadeau's position, he really has the deck that seems to have the most buying power, and so he wants to be able to convert that into victory points. That is my guess about high counseling at this stage of the game. And also, I suppose if you have the money, your options are becoming more and more limited in terms of what you're going to do with money at this stage of the game. You can always hire a bunch of troops from those green spaces, but yeah. Can't be sure. Ron here, I think, just kind of taking an action with the choices that he has. My guess is that he doesn't have a lot of cards that are letting him take actions over on the left side of the board there. So he's doing these kind of Dune space actions. And he's debating about whether he wants to put out this troop, and I think decides that he doesn't. He doesn't want to fight for it, wants to save it for something bigger in the future. He doesn't value having just a couple of spice, and he doesn't have any other troops in reserve, so maybe building them up is good for him. I don't think that he has a lot of money, so he can't do that either. And he must have just used Helena to bank a card as well. I didn't see which one it was. But I assume that the laughter was because that space travel card is maybe better for him. So if he has the $3, maybe he'll buy it anyway, even with his Helena discount. Looks like Gray's got another void. Oh yeah, he's got a fold space there, so that's going to go in the discard, but it's going to let him take the action he wants to. He's just going to be moving up tracks to get points. Yeah, he's just trying to move up in all of them, get all over the place. The injury cards are fun. I think they give you extra options. I haven't really looked at the breakdown of them. Having the sort of ability in your back pocket to protect you from weird cheeky stuff in combat, or being the person who does weird cheeky stuff in combat is great. There's ways to score extra points on them. It's converting spice into points or an endgame point. Those are obviously quite wonderful as well. Moving up on tracks, and those things that are going to move you up on tracks, you're going to want to know that earlier in the game rather than later. So scooping up those intrigue cards on the earlier side and then making your game plan around what it is that you have available to you does make a lot of sense to me, rather than kind of scooping them up at the end to be like, ooh, I hope I got what I needed. Because you can sometimes probably just draw duds that just don't help you out in the same way that they want you to. Looks like Joon's considering a persuasion purchase here. Couple of sad scouts. Space travel is not so exciting for her because she's already at the second tier of the spacing guild. And then she actually has to draw back into that card. I have 13 violence, so I especially don't like putting 5 guys in if you have 3 extra swords there. I would have just put 1 or 2. Because at the beginning of the turn, there were no troops out there anyway. That's just me. All right, Joon says, yeah, I'll take the space travel. Drawing an extra card seems fine. Happy to go to space. Happy to become best friends with the Spacing Guild. And that new card does not look like anything special to me. I do think that there's the card track gets a little clogged up in this game if everyone sort of agrees that the crappy cards are the crappy cards and no one buys them. It kind of just becomes a random, what does the player in front of you buy off the top, and it's a little bit of a shame. I think I feel like there could be a way for it to be a bit more dynamic, that card track there. But then I guess it often just winds up advantaging the player who passes first, which is almost always going to be the first player. So I don't know. It's tough to say. I just don't like the dynamic of draw a card and then maybe the person after you gets a nicer card to choose from. I haven't played a ton of that in this game, but I've played other deck builders that use that kind of idea, and it just isn't totally for me. Ron here looks like he's about to buy, and then Gray's going to finish this out with an action and a buy, so Gray's going to have a long-term kind of thing to pass to the end here. Ron looks like he's got a decent chunk of change, not enough to buy himself a victory point with Spice Must Flow, but enough to do some damage. In theory, he could buy that helicopter carrier thing, but it doesn't look like the players really like that card, so I'll have to keep that in mind. Maybe it's exciting at the beginning, but... we scoop up. He must be scooping up some generic cards from the side of the board. I definitely think that I've missed a decent number of the purchases that the players are doing, like what they can... They're picking up sort of those default 2 influence cards on the side of the board that let them take the green and blue actions, I think is what they allow. All right, and here we go. We see that Thopter immediately coming into play. Oh, does the Thopter let you go somewhere where someone else is? Is that what it does? I have no idea. I know that Helena can go on spaces that other people have gone on. That's her, I think, kind of seems to me mediocre special ability. But Gray really needs some spice here. And then is drawing some card thanks to that Thopter. Now we see kind of the same situation where, right, like he's drawn through his deck, getting to the cards, and it seems like another situation where he's going to be discarding his good cards. I don't know how good the rest of his deck is. I'm under the impression that it is a fine deck, but not crazy exciting. I could be wrong. They all pass back to Gray. Sorry, dude, you're the only one with 3 actions. Reveals a couple cards, plus the 2 for his thing there, and that's enough apparently for a Spice Must Flow. That's a big deal for him. Wow. So okay, I will eat my words on the High Council. Just let him do what he needed to do. And he boxes Sceadeau out to get a 2 spice out of him, because I don't think Sceadeau has any intrigue cards. That's one of the things about not drawing intrigue cards, is that players feel like they can boss you around, which is maybe a little bit unfortunate. To that point, I actually think that making sure you pick up like a intrigue card at the very least is nice, just so that people kind of respect what you have in play and fear what could happen. Just that idea that something could happen. Players don't want to feel like they got blown out if they, know that it's possible for you to have something, so they'll try to play around it. Just putting that fear in other players can really put them at a disadvantage. And yeah, for a 5 to 1-to-1 troop commitment, Joon's going to win this and pick up an extra intrigue card and an extra spice or 2 over the other players that committed. I still think 5 was just too much. I mean, obviously hindsight's 2020, but it didn't seem like the other players had access to a lot of troops. It didn't seem like it was the kind of card that warranted them suddenly getting access to a bunch of troops and putting them into play. So I just think it was a lot of work for her that she didn't necessarily need to commit to. This is a really interesting card for the next round, but I am actually realizing that I am more tired than I am. So we're going to 3-part this sucker, and you're going to see me tomorrow when I finish it up. Thanks for sticking with me, everyone, and we will be back in just a moment. And we're back. All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to try to do a marathon recording today. We got the day to ourselves, so see if we can get a couple games in. But first, we got to wrap up this Dune game. We got about 50 minutes left, and that makes sense. We're a little past the halfway mark of the game. The players have less than half the points they need to make officially on the board, but they're going to be getting a lot of points from those alliances on the left side of the board. Pretty quickly, the folks are just kind of one step away. Their decks are stronger. They have resources accumulated. We see that both Sceadeau and Joon have just piles of spice. Gray also with a bunch of spice there. Can't quite see what Ron's situation is, but I'm sure he's got a pile of resources of his own. I think we just saw Sceadeau do that action, the pick up the money action at the end of the last session. So I think that's where we're picking up, with him essentially heading up to the top of that Emperor track for that additional victory point in an impending turn. as well as some troops and $2 along the way there. I guess if we assume that the game designers think these four factions are balanced, we can say that 2 cubes is worth $3, is worth 1 intrigue card, is worth 1 water, since those are the rewards for getting into the 4th space on those tracks. So that's a kind of conversion we could sort of consider in our minds. It's actually kind of interesting that $3 one is slightly better than that $2 space, but we see 2 cubes, 1 water, and intrigue card all out there is essentially action options for players to take. So maybe going up to Spicing Guild. The Space Spicing Guild is just a little bit better. Oh, cool. So Ron is taking this action where he drops a couple water. I think Joon's the only one who also had a pile of water to just collect a ton of cards out of his deck. Of all the players, I know Ron's deck the least because of the way that the cards have been picked up and everything like that. So I can't quite say how good this is for him. I've had the hardest time following along. He also reserves cards with Helena, and I don't know if he buys them or if he buys generic cards because they're kind of blocked on the screen here. There's a decent amount going on in this game. I actually say one thing I quite like about it is that everything's pretty trackable. In terms of if you were sitting at this table and playing this game, I think you could have a pretty good sense of what everyone is doing. There's not an overwhelm there, but there are just a lot of different resources, but they have some pretty clear flows, right? You pick up water lets you go on these couple of spaces and so on and so forth. I think that's neat. I like that. We see that Sceadeau Legion coming into play, but instead of Gray choosing to use it to go over to the Empire track, he's using it to get some extra people on the board and an extra purchasing dollar. So I assume he's kind of planned out what he's already playing for the rest of his round. The fact that he's valuing that so high that he's going first. The 3 persuasion that he gets off of that green board up there from the High Council in that spot. My guess is that he's angling to purchase another Spice Must Flow this turn. Pick up that extra victory point. The fact that he also hasn't moved up the Empire track with that Sceadeau Legion card, to me, sort of suggests that one of his Baron Harkonnen things might be for the Emperor. I say that because, going to the 2nd tier somewhere is beneficial, but going to the 3rd tier, largely not helpful. And he already sees that Shadow's kind of up that track there. So it also might be the only card that let him go on that spot, that Hall of Oratory at the top. So that's also possible. But it's tough to say. Joon here, I guess, is thinking. I can't tell. I was busy talking about Gray. I don't know if that Smuggler's Thopter is a card that she just played or if it's her discard pile. I think it's her discard pile. I feel like she played that last round, if I remember correctly. And I don't know if I talked about this last night, but that conflict card, I think, is a really interesting conflict card. So, a lot of the conflict cards, as we've spoken about, generate 1 point. This one is a little funny in that it Joon's making a huge... I'll come back to what I was saying in a second. So she's playing Power Play, that card she picked up earlier, to move up double on that track. My guess is that was the only card that allowed her to use Highliners here. And she really wants to win this conflict. Because as I was about to say about this conflict, you could argue that this is a 2 victory point conflict, because I've sort of argued that every move up on a track is worth about half a point in your dream world. That's not necessarily the cleanest way to look at it. In Joon's case, it's going to definitely be a point for the Fremen. It'll be halfway towards a point for the Bene Gesserit. It will be useless on the Spacing Guild because of that power play, and it will be a point on the Emperor track. So for her, it's going to be somewhere between a point and a point and a half, essentially making these moves up the track. And that's not the most efficient that this card could be. Certainly, it could be less efficient, but I think it's not necessarily. I think most players are going to benefit from this card. Is what I'm trying to say. And so I suspect that this is one of the more powerful level 2 conflicts, because it just does a lot of work to move up on all those tracks. You need additional infrastructure to make it work. You need to have set up some things or made some plans along the way. But that's really interesting. Sceadeau here is the only one who really seems to respect that Mentat action. I've heard different people say conflicting things with it. I mean, he gets him a card off of his deck, which, allows him to draw into more of the stuff. I think he already has Opulence in the discard pile, because that's the card that we think he used to play his first action. But then also the Mentat allows him to essentially place that third action. In this instance, he will not be going last with it. I think that's actually one of the more powerful ways to use the Mentat, is to be the last player to move on the board. But Gray has 3 actions as well and is after Sceadeau in the turn order. So Sceadeau's not even going to get the last play here. So I'm curious to see what he's doing with the Mentat. My guess is that he just kind of wanted to pay $2 to draw a card, and essentially get to reuse my worker elsewhere, sort of opening up his options or moving through his deck. Ron goes to the folding space. I assume that's pretty much just for the point on the Spacing Guild there, trying to push his way up that track. He doesn't seem to have quite as much steam as the rest of the players, but he is still leading. And he's going to be done for the round. Gray here is going to use that card. I think Baron Harkonnen seems like a really, I've said his name so many times, seems like a really powerful, I've been told he's one of the best, and I can absolutely see why. The ability to get 2 free bumps is on the Alliance tracks is really nice. And then that Signet Ring ability of paying $1 for an intrigue card, you could interpret that as essentially a half an action in and of itself, because you get $2 for going on the Emperor track, and intrigue card is a whole action on its own. So that's a nice way to get those intrigue cards. And like I was saying, it just sort of mentally messes with people, generates the fear in them of what is it that you're doing, that I think is really quite powerful. Gray here only commits 1 cube to the battle, and this is a limitation of Harkonnen, is that at some point he's going to have to push, I believe it's 4 or more troops into the middle. So keeping a couple extra in the garrison for his master stroke is definitely something that he wants to consider. I assume he's essentially throwing out that singleton saying, hey, this guy can fetch a water. If I could interpret this space as a water and a card draw rather than a cube and a card draw, that is okay by me. Maybe he gets $2 too, depending on kind of what his and Ron's passing situation is. But probably they're not in the situation where they're going to really go hard on this scenario. And again, you find that Joon this turn, by the way, with the Highliner is sort of the first to commit to the battle there, has to really end up committing everything. And part of that is because Gray has 3 in reserve. It's quite viable that he'll start pushing out a lot of troops. He has those intrigue cards. So this round, having to overcommit in that way, I think I understand her fear in the situation. Certainly Gray is in a position where he can flex if he really needs to. I don't think that winning this battle would probably not be as good for Gray. It depends a lot on what his master stroke things are, but I suspect that this is the kind of thing that doesn't value as well for him as it does for other players. Just given where he's at on the tracks, it's going to be a move between that 2 and 3 slot in a lot of those instances. And yeah, we see Joon there has apparently had a card in hand that allowed her to move up the Spacing Guild, which I feel like makes that power play for that Highliner is a little bit less valuable. I mean, it was probably the only way that she could play Highliners, but it's an unfortunate use of a power play. It almost wastes the victory point that it gives you to do that. How sweet would it have been if she'd been able to for instance, if she had played it on the Fremen Basin spot, but then she'd only have 2 cubes in there, so she's a lot less likely to win that conflict. Yeah. But it'd be nicer to move up that track there. She'd get the point for being in the second tier, and then she'd get the Freeman Mega Alliance at the top. It's a lot more points, I think, than what the space moving up the Spacing Guild ended up doing for her, unfortunately. Shadow's Mentat went to to spend some spice and just continued to fix his deck, trash a card, and draw some cards. I actually don't know what the rules are when you play cards. I think they're in your play area and you don't actually discard them until the end. So I think he's just kind of pushing to the bottom of his deck so that when he goes to redraw, he'll shuffle his discard pile, which now has Opulence and presumably some other good cards of his in it at this point in time, back into his deck. Looks like a fold space there being used by Gray to move up the Bene Gesserit. To me, that's a really clear indicator that the Master Stroke includes Bene Gesserit as one of its options. Because I don't know that... Gray has like the generic Alliance cards, but I don't know that he has otherwise very many Bene Gesserit cards. Alternatively, it could just be that he sees that he's the only player really... sort of contesting that spot or contesting it as powerfully. There's nowhere else where he'd want to move up to get that space. So I might be just overreading it. I don't actually even really need to interpret. Like, it's not even that important. Like, he's going to move up the Fremen track. He's going to move up the Emperor track. He's going to move up the Bene Gesserit track. And we just know that two of those are going to be free unless he chose Spacing Guild at the beginning, but I think he would have played a little bit differently if that was the case. You wouldn't put yourself in that position, I believe. Joon looks like she's done for the turn. She didn't pick up anything off the top. She's buying right now. Ron passed for the turn. I didn't see him picking anything up, which means that he might have bought something cheap, or he had two daggers, it looks like, in his card, or two swords. I don't know specifically that they're daggers, so he didn't pick up anything big, that's for sure. But that's probably nice. It means he probably is going to get second here over Gray, scoop up a couple extra bucks. It is interesting how you can play this game and generate a lot of value off of those conflicts, but you're seeing also like not a lot of not everyone is kind of committing to that. Joon and Ron seem to really value the conflict thing, and Shadow and Gray seem to be more opportunistic in how they're approaching it. The both of them sort of focusing more on their engines. For Shadow, it's that what his deck looks like, and for Gray, it's the extra action and the High Council and all that good stuff. What am I missing here? I assume that they're ending the turn. Oh no, Gray has a final action to take. I don't think that he grabs one of those spice spots currently. I imagine that he's probably limited in taking Alliance spaces. Like, he could take a Fremen space on the side of the board if that's, to get some of the resources over there, but he might not have a card to do so, considering he just used a fold space. I would assume not. And he can't go to that other blue space because he's not allies with the Fremen. So unfortunately, that would mean that he kind of has to take one of those yellow triangle spots. He doesn't have enough money to go up and like recruit troops or anything like that. Yeah, I think this is one of those things about having three workers in this game. It's not only the card thing that I mentioned, but like the spaces where actions are, like, they definitely dry up. They dry up quickly in this game, unlike some other like worker placement games tend to have this like ramping of things. Agricola always gets its extra things throughout the course of the turn. Gray had already put out 3. What am I talking about? They must have just been... he must have been doing his final buy. Let me go back for a second. Maybe I was too busy talking about something that was wrong. I want to see if he moved up a point to... okay. He played an intrigue card that allowed him to, I think, pay some spice to get a victory point. So it's not that he had enough for Spice Must Flow. It's that he was using those resources. I'm curious what the logic is behind using that now instead of later. I watched this and I remember him commenting on it now that we're here again, saying, he's he wouldn't normally do this right now. So I'm not sure that he's scared of somehow spice being taken from him. Maybe there's an intrigue card that lets you steal spice from other people or steal cards from other people. Oh, you know what? He might have 4 intrigue cards in his hand. That wouldn't be too surprising since he's Harkonnen and has been picked up a bunch of extra cards. So that Bene Gesserit space forces opponents to discard a card. So actually, that's my guess. My guess is that he has too many intrigue cards in hand, and so he had to lean into something early, and he knows he's going to get a point with the 2 spice, so of course, why not? That seems like drawing a university in Catan. Like that just, I mean, obviously you have to do a little bit of work to score that point, but that seems like one of the better cards that you can draw from the intrigue deck. I'm sure that experienced people will be like, what? No, obviously this is the best intrigue card, but that seems good to me. So anything that scores a point, it's 11% of the way to victory. I think Sceadeau scooped up another point there, which to me suggests that it's very possible that he could have bought a Spice Must Flow, and I just missed it. When they do their pass turns, it's impressive how quickly things can move. While I'm finishing a thought on something else, I'll miss something else along here. So maybe when we go to the grand final and do that, the players will be a little bit more worried about winning and also a little bit less experienced in the game. So I'll be able to keep up with with a bit more discipline as we go through. They must be playing combat cards right now. I wonder if Joon has like a retreat card. Something that lets you like pull a certain amount of cubes back in a conflict because she has kind of overcommitted a bit here and is trying to decide whether she like wants to or not. Unfortunately for her, I think both Ron and Gray have some intrigue cards in hand, so it's maybe too risky to do that. So Joon's going to end up scoring a couple points here to catch up thanks to the power of that move up on every track situation, right? That scored her 2 points, and now we're at a 4-way tie at 5 points. 4 players have scored 4 points on that's not the 4th round, I think. Was it the 4th round? Who went first? I think it's the 5th round. I think it was the 5th round, if I remember correctly. Oh, it should be able to count, right? Because the level 3 conflicts are coming out. So it must be the 7th round then. And I've heard this can be a 7-round game, or more likely an 8-round game, I think is what I've been told. So if that's the case and the players are like going on a pretty reasonable clip here, we're going to, I think, see a bunch of points get scored over the next round or two. And I think that makes sense, right? Like you're not going to develop your deck anymore. You're just here to buy victory points if you can buy victory points. Players have a bunch of resources. You see Joon has like more water than you could ever need on the planet Dune. You see that Sceadeau has a ton of spice. Obviously, we can't see Ron's resources, but I don't think he's got a ton right now, actually. And Gray's got a couple of peeps in reserve, as well as that Master Stroke coming along the way. So that's going to be ending up scoring, a couple points there. On the Alliance track, we see that Sceadeau is 1 move away from a point. Joon is 1 move away from a point on the Bene Gesserit. Ron is 1 move away from a point on the Bene Gesserit as well. And Gray is 1, 2, 3 single moves away from points. So looking at the board state right now, I'd say that Gray is leading. He also has High Council and Sword Master, so probably the most flexibility as well in terms of like what the options and actions are that he's going to take with his cards. So it's not a slam dunk because he's a little resource poor compared to the other players, but he has the most points on board. That really must have just been... He didn't seem like he was winning, but he's just, I think, had a few kind of massive turns where he's turned in those intrigue cards for points. He's picked up that, managed to buy a Spice Must Flow even with three people moving into play. So he has just managed to find a way to shift gears and start raking in some points in a way that I think the others haven't. And the fact that he has really focused on playing on those alliance spaces more so than the other players. He has moved up in total 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sceadeau has moved up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ron has moved up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Joon has moved up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But keep in mind, she just got 4 from that last conflict. So Gray has taken more alliance space actions than any other player. Because Joon's is actually 6 times. I think that Ron going first in this turn, I do wonder if he has a pile of spice and was prepping for highliners, because I think that going first in the round 3 conflicts, a lot of those cards have 2 victory points on them, and really unfortunate for him that he flipped a conflict card that was not that. That's, I think, a maybe single or double move up of tracks of your choice, which is a victory point. Let's just assume that it's a double, because it seems a little bit weak if it's a single. But it's going to be a victory point. Might even be a little bit more than that if it is a double and you can split them up. Although, actually, I think the rules are that you can't split them up. So I lied. It's 1. So it's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that conflict card. It just isn't the big. A lot of the 3-stage conflict cards are 2 points, I think, to accelerate towards the end of the game, make that conflict at the end very exciting. Gray goes ahead and use that Sardaukar Legion to get a couple bucks and move up the track there. Did he move the wrong player? What happened? Was he not already there? I'm going to go back again. Went too far back, maybe. Now I'm just trying to realign. All right, so Ron is here. I think Ron is first. I said the thing about the conflict. Oh, I see. So he goes to sell. So he did have a handful of spice, and he goes to collect money. I am struggling to fathom why he does that action. I don't know that he cares so much about High Council or Swordmaster now. That probably sucks for Sceadeau, who has a pile of spice, and he doesn't want a highliner this turn. And now Gray can set up to highliner at the beginning of next turn, knowing that the odds of a conflict being, some victory points is much higher now that one of the cards that doesn't give as many victory points is flipped out there. That's an interesting play by Ron. I'd be really curious to see what his second action is. I'm struggling to see what you can do with a bunch of money at this stage of the game. And now I wonder if Sceadeau ends up going to the highliner action this turn, because if he can't sell that spice for money, and he won't be able to use the spice if Gray or Joon decides on the next round to highliner. Okay, yeah, I was right. Gray does move up the wrong piece. Maybe he's like me and always plays yellow. I make that mistake a lot. I always am like, I started playing yellow because everyone hated playing yellow, and now it's really difficult for me to not play yellow in games. So yeah, he should have moved essentially his blue piece up to that victory point there and scored himself a point. Which would put him at 6, which is one of those points that we were waiting for him to cash in on. $2 there is not a ton, but sort of, I guess, allows him some options of a couple spaces on the board that he maybe couldn't go to without anything. Like maybe he's thinking of doing the Mentat thing, or maybe honestly he just did it for the victory point. Go to the Emperor space for the victory point. Doesn't have the spice to do that kind of big betrayal action up top there. Oh, which is an action that Sceadeau could take with all of his spice now. That's interesting. All right, Joon has just 1 billion water, so why not use the water to draw a bunch of cards from your deck? That makes sense. Looks like winds up pushing her 1 troop into this conflict, which I maybe would. 3 spice for being second or third place is not too shabby. Although admittedly, I don't know what she's going to do with spice at the end of the game. On the last round. I mean, the spice auctions are the ones that allow you to kind of contest that final battle too, but I don't know that Joon has any other spice. Yeah, I don't know. Tough call. But Joon seems to think that it's worth at least the one, which I think makes sense. I'm surprised that it wouldn't make any sense. All right. Sceadeau does the thing. He gets a bunch of money. I don't know what card he just used to go there, but I'm assuming that if he's got 4 money and he's getting 5 money, he has enough to pay for a point off the opulence thing. He moves up to 6. Looks like he's leading, but it really should be Gray that is tied with him at 6 there. I imagine they'll catch and correct that pretty soon. Kind of surprised that nobody ended up catching that move up the track thing. But I mean, that's something that's I think pretty obvious. I think they'll be able to figure that out soon. Maybe even right now as they're looking at the Emperor track. Yeah, man, don't forget your money. And extra money. Oh, so he must have played opulence to go there. So he's got piles of cash and is not going to... What are these people going to do with all his cash? So Ron uses all the cash to get a Swordmaster. And I'm very curious to understand this. Like, to me, this seems way, way, way too late in the game to be taking a Swordmaster action. He basically spent 2 actions and more than that because he had to get the spice. He sold the spice, bought the Swordmaster. It just seems like a lot of actions to get an additional act. That's no victory points for having that Swordmaster, and there can't be that many turns left in this game. You know, this round he'll get to use that Swordmaster, next round for sure, and then the game might be over. Maybe it goes for another round after that, but it seems unlikely with players who know what they're doing. Just given the clip at which they're scoring points and the number of points that I see that Gray has available, like, yeah, I'm not sure about that. Okay, here they are discovering the Emperor track thing. Pretty sure. Yeah, and Gray is playing this initiate person to draw a card, and put a troop in for that blue dune space there, that blue circle dune space. I'm noticing how much the players are like evaluating and appreciating card draw in this game, especially Gray and Sceadeau. I mean, but you know, Joon just scooped up 3 cards, so clearly card draw is just good, and that makes sense in a game where you have a limited number of cards in your deck. It's essentially adding to your purchasing power with that persuasion. You're trying to get to that magic 9, especially at this stage of the game. Let me go ahead and mute my phone because I don't want it to keep beeping at me. And Gray here didn't push in any troops for this conflict. He just has a plan. He knows exactly what he's doing, I think, if he doesn't push any in. Oh, there we go. Yeah, why not, right? You can only push up to 2 additional from the number of troops that you've made. So leaving 4 behind says, next turn, I want to be able to push up to 2 additional people in each time. That seems like plenty. I mean, he'll have the 4 plus whatever number he makes. Sceadeau does have a bunch in reserve right now, thanks to the Emperor sending him some extra troops, which I think, it doesn't have a sword action, so it doesn't allow him to deploy anybody. Joon here is scooping up some spice, so clearly does value spice. That's going to be 3 spice, plus she's going to get 3 otherwise, so she'll have 6, which allows her to do that highliner action or something else next turn. And then I don't know where those extra 3 troops just came from. Maybe some card that she played. Oh, maybe she only kept 1 spice, so maybe she played some card that gave her troops. And then decides that she wants to go hard on this conflict, grab that victory point now while she can, because she's not feeling like she's going to win the next conflict. I wonder if I would have left those people in reserve and go crazy on the next conflict. We're here to fight. Folks are here to move. They want in on the spice. I think 3 spice is just a really nice consolation prize.
And I guess, I mean, I'm probably also, again, just not realizing how valuable those intrigue cards are. I mean, they are a full-on action. I do think that I look at them like, draw a card? I can't seem that to be that good. So I think that I need to realize how good those intrigue cards are is the vibe that I'm getting. Ron's going to go ahead and move up the Fremen track here, which will allow him to probably next turn claim that extra victory point. He does really seem like he's out of gas. I would love to hear about that Swordmaster play, or just if you are watching this and you know this game better than me, please explain to me like why that makes sense. Because it seems sketchy to me, and I'm sure he knows what he's doing. I'm just struggling to come up with an answer. Again, I'm sure that some of the options in this game have to do with how limited the player's choices are. Gray's going to pick up some spice here. Oh, good for Ron. He gets an extra free spice. And, the pay no water to get 2 spice seems like a nice, easy action here. That's going to give him 3 spice. That means that Gray actually probably doesn't want to win this conflict. He'll then have the 6 spice. He can highliner at the beginning of the next turn, put 5 troops, add 2 more in. So he's got 7 into the conflict at the beginning of whatever the next conflict is. Master stroke. Really taking advantage of the fact that he knows he's going to be the first player in the last round of the game. That's great. Joon here managed to get to the 9 in order to buy that Spice Must Flow, so that's a victory point there, and probably going to win this one, so that's another victory point right there. Putting her at 7, which is certainly what I'd call spitting distance of 10. And she also has that Bene Gesserit point that is basically just waiting to be scored. Oh, is this really bad for Ron? If that is indeed a double move, I could see Joon going up the Fremen track and taking that other point from Ron, which is going to, I think, kind of put the nail in his coffin. Curious to see if it is a double move or a single move. I wish I could read that card a little better. Or if I had my own copy of this game, I could pull out the cards. That would help too. What did Sceadeau do? Oh, he's just got cards that give him spice because spice must flow and so on and so forth. And he scored a victory point, so I would guess that he had 9 to buy another spice must flow, which makes sense. I mean, you think he's prioritized that buying thing. I do notice that Ron, who's falling behind at this point in time, is the only player who's not on the High Council. That does not escape my notice. At least every other player has at least once bought a Spice Must Flow. So, yeah. Cash for points. Persuasion for points. Sceadeau does not add any more to his military strength there. That being said, I think Gray is going to keep everything he has in reserve to ensure that he wins the next fight. He also has enough to buy a point here. I don't know if that's his second or his third one. Same with Sceadeau if it's his second or third, but clearly that infrastructure. And it's pretty impressive that Gray has managed to afford the 9 each round because, like I said, he's using 3 cards to put his workers into play. He drew an extra card. Maybe he had some other card that, and then that Thopter. That Thopter is letting him draw extra cards as well that he has down in the play. So he has plus 3 cards, so maybe 5 cards in hand with 2 from the High Council. Yeah, okay, that seems pretty reasonable. I don't know that he's trashed any of his daggers. Maybe I missed some trashing along the way, or just I'm having a hard time at this point keeping track of what everyone is doing because I've done this in 3 different steps. So that's on me. Here we go, scooping up some extra spice. And Sceadeau's got 5 spice there, which lets him take any spice action on the board except for the highliner action. They're going to go ahead and resolve this conflict. I was right that it's a double move. Joon moves up the Fremen track, which makes sense. Really, just I think that puts the nail in Ron's coffin. He's just too far behind at this point. Really kind of unfortunate for him. I wonder if he should have, instead of, I don't know how much spice he had, but instead of selling spice, I wonder if he had enough spice to highliners. Because if he did, where could he have moved up? I mean, you could just moved up on the Emperor track and scored a point there. Not terribly exciting, but I still think it's better than the Swordsman. I'm just going to keep harping on that point. There we go. Double victory points. That's almost certainly going to make this the last round of the game. If Ron wins this fight, that's not true, because that will essentially put him on parity with the other players. But if any other player wins it, then they just need one extra point. So I think almost certainly round 8 here is going to be the last turn of the game. And I think actually, now that I'm seeing this game play out, sitting in seat 7, sitting in seat 3 and sitting in seat 4 means that you get to go first in round 7 and round 8. And they drafted in reverse order. So this seems like one of those few games where you actually want to be in 4th seat or 3rd seat rather than 1st or 2nd seat. I wonder what experienced players would say about the game. It seems to me like the last player advantage is pretty good in this game. Really counterintuitive for a game that's a worker placement game. Usually you want to go first and do all those things. And we see Gray here is going to execute exactly as I suggested. We're pushing the troops out. 5, 6, 7. Let's see what he's got. If he's played it perfectly, it's Fremen and Bene Gesserit to get those points there. Not quite perfect. Emperor and Bene Gesserit. So that's a point. And then he could get one more from activating a Fremen space, which, I mean, he could just push even more troops out there. I think that would be completely valid if he has that as an option. He has the water to pay. So I think my guess would be that Fremen space down there is sort of the sweet spot for him. I don't know why he just moved up another on the Bene Gesserit track. I'm going to assume, on the Spacing Guild track. I'm silly. Of course, he moves up the Spacing Guild track because he went to Highliners. I do wonder how many cards in his deck have that action. Like, how was it lucky that he drew the card that let him go to Highliners? How much is that a limitation in this game? How much do players think about it? That's one of these things that as they're playing through and executing, I know that I'm going to go and play and be like, all right, I'm doing Highliners on the next turn. That's what I want to do. And I'm going to draw my hand and look at it and be like, I can't do the thing. That's going to be a real feeling, I'm sure, as I play this game a bit more. The Great Flat there with a pile of spice on it. I don't know that anybody cares about it at this point in time. I don't think spice does anything at the end of the game, unless you have cards that say that. So Shadow and Ron seem a little bit less animated than they did a minute ago. I think that's pretty. I mean, it looks like Gray has 10 points right now. I'm not sure how they can stop him, but stopping him seems like the only option here, right? Joon's going to go ahead and collect a ton of cards. Sort of opens up her choices, also kind of lets her make sure that she's buying a Spice Must Flow for a victory point. She's not in a great place to contest the battle here, unfortunately. And only the players know what their intrigue cards are. Maybe someone's holding on to something that gives them a bunch of extra daggers. But man, overcoming a 14 point strength there is quite a lot. Gray set up for that for a long time, and I don't think he's won a single conflict. And he just was focused essentially on that infrastructure, those alliances. Very Harkonian of him. It is actually interesting to see it. Now that I'm looking at Gray's alliance spaces, there are certainly a couple not perfectly efficient moves there. So like that 3rd space on the Spacing Guild, that 3rd space on the Emperor Guild, those moves are never going to end up helping him out. It's the kind of thing that you can't, if you can look back from the end of the game, great, but you can't tell from the beginning what that's going to look like. Shadow taking that Mentat, I think, he's got a pile of money, so essentially letting him take the last, Ron will take the last action of the game because he's got 3 workers, but letting him kind of go after Gray at the end there maybe has some nice options for him, and I'm also sure that drawing that extra card, as we said before, something that the players seem to really value. This move, I'm sure, for Ron, it's basically a point to move up the Bene Gesserit track, and he's got some spare spice. Why not get rid of a crappy card and draw 2 extra cards off your deck? that's going to get him closer to the spice must flow, although maybe he just can't afford it because he doesn't have that high council thing. That +2 persuasion seems to be really, really valuable. I mean, getting to 9 is not easy. Most of the cards that are good at buying things have a 2 persuasion at the bottom, so you need to have a chunk of those cards and the extra money. It seems hard to pull off. I do hope that as they do this process more in the future, they'll consider trying for some tournaments following a specific player. Suppose that we have Gray, who wound up being a double ring winner this year, is in a tournament. What a great player to like choose to set up the camera so you can see their hands, see their resources, and that was kind of like a little pop-up thing, very poker cards in the hole. I don't think seeing everyone's hand is practical nor even all that beneficial, but it would be pretty cool. Here we go with an excess move on the Bene Gesserit. I think that intrigue card there probably just giving him additional options. He's playing defense at this point, right? Like he doesn't need anything except for to ensure that what happens. I'm not sure how Joon scored that extra point. I assume that it's some intrigue card where she cashed in something. Because I thought that she was at 7, although maybe I just missed her scoring a point for that Fremen leadership. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wow, she's got 6 points just in alliances alone. That's amazing. Yeah, and by the way, that card, that conflict level 2 card, she's at 1, 2, 3 spots where that extra move gave her a point. So currently that conflict level 2 card was 3 half steps, so 1.5 points at a minimum, or you could argue 3 points if she wasn't going to get there anyway. Seems like a really powerful conflict to win. All right, Joon here is going to take her last action of the game, except for the pass action. I think, unfortunately for her, she's probably seeing a bit of the writing on the wall. My guess is that she's going to have the 9, having just drawn 3 additional cards. So wants to make sure her hand is culled towards doing that, which will get her Spice Must Slow to put her at 9 points. But she really needs not Gray to win this conflict, and then Sceadeau probably is not a much better option, given that I'm sure he'll find a way to score a point. So she does... I don't know. She didn't just buy that. She must have discarded that or played it or something. I don't know. And Duncan, Idaho is going to send her out. She's going to throw a couple more troops into play and draw a card. So I actually wonder if she didn't get to the Magic 9 and decides that she needs to do that. Or, it could just be that literally everything else isn't worth anything. I guess that can't be true. The intrigue card must always be worth something. And why not throw your troops out there? Game's going to end. Pick up some spice. I don't know if it's a tiebreaker or something like that, but get in it. Sceadeau here doesn't have any alliance spaces that he needs to take. Has a pile of money, I assume, for opulence to spend 6 and buy a point at the end of the round. If he doesn't have it in hand, he needs to do some card drawing. But I think all the card drawing spaces on the board have been scooped up by the other players and by Sceadeau himself. I suppose he could use some of that money to put a bunch of troops in garrison. Nope, that doesn't make any sense because he needs to send troops out. The clumsiness of throwing those wooden pieces around says to me that is not an action that he was excited to take. Just moves one step up the Fremen track. Maybe he'll be able to get a second, and that's kind of the goal there. But just sending those 2 guys out does not seem very good. Ron wants to get in the mix too, and does indeed draw that intrigue card, giving him an opportunity to contest this depending on what else he has. He's got a good poker face, so we don't know what that looks like. He's going to have another action there. I assume that he just played an intrigue card that lets him move up the Emperor track. My guess is that is indicating that he had 4 cards in his hand. But you don't need to be worried about discarding cards because the Bene Gesserit space that makes you discard cards is gone. Maybe it's just good. He's just in a good habit of playing a card out. That could be the case. Did Gray just pass? Gray passed early. Only 2 workers in play, right? Yeah, he must have exactly 9. Buys a spice must flow. It's got to be, right? Why else would you pass? He had 2 daggers in hand as well, or 2 swords in hand to put him up to 16. He clearly didn't have another Fremen thing. I mean, why not? Why wouldn't you take the point for that action? I'm sure that was the case. They're not moving him a point, though. So maybe he didn't buy a spice must flow. I do think he revealed his whole hand. Is he going to land at 10 exactly? All right. Joon making that purchase up to 9 points, which I think is where she's going to end the game at. Given that there's 8 minutes left in this, I'm pretty sure someone's going to win. It certainly feels like it's Gray right now. I think the writing is on the wall for the players as well. I think once they put the 7 troops out there, there's nothing you can do to contest that. It's very clear that like Highliners, giant troops into play, setting yourself up to have that spice is kind of the thing to do. To that point, I wonder if anyone was supposed to block Gray from getting spice at maybe it's the Imperial Basin on the previous round, because then he wouldn't have had enough spice to run Highliners out there, and then someone else can. But I guess at the end of the day, if it's not you, what do you care, right? Oh, that's a lot of moves on the Fremen track. Is that a power play, Sceadeau? What did you do? Must have been some cards he played from hand, but 2 moves up is a little bit excessive. I guess he's using his Fremen allegiance there to get some troops into play. It's not going to be quite enough, I imagine. And he got a point. Oh, he got a point for the Fremen, of course. So maybe Sceadeau will also end at 10 if he can do opulence and has enough persuasion to get a spice must flow. That seems like a thing that he would do. Ron's final Emperor action here, just collecting a bunch of stuff, getting some troops out that unfortunately are garrisoned. So he'll get a point for that, which I think is going to end his game at 7 unless he's got some secrets. And we've got a many-way conflict for second place here, it looks like. I don't know what the tiebreaker is in this game. So if both Sceadeau and Gray end at 10, yeah, I don't know what it would be. Let's see how it plays out. Also, maybe one of them has like an endgame point intrigue card or a way to spend some resources for an intrigue card. We've seen those a couple times. Sceadeau with a pile of resources there that are unused. That's obviously not the way you want to have your board looking at the end of the game. There goes $6 for opulence. That's one of the points. I don't know what he's thinking about with the persuasion, because it's pretty clear that if anything, he's going to buy that sandworm. Maybe that was it. Maybe he didn't have the 9. Didn't have the 9, so he doesn't get quite to 10 points. So I wonder if he'll end at 9. Ron with those awesome daggers. Whoop whoop. Now he's only half of Gray's strength. I don't know what that card is that he just played, but it does something. Kills some troops. Like it's a defector or something like that. Actually, it makes this a very real threat. 10 to 14. I know that there are intrigue cards in the deck that do. I mean, that one card literally just made a 4-point swing. That said, I know that Gray has a pile of cards in his hand. That looks like they went around to see if anyone else is playing any cards. That's it. Gray's staring at the board, hoping that nothing happens. And, oh, there we go. There's +4. And then Gray's playing a card immediately, so he's got something else to add as well. Another +3. Tried his best. It was very, very close. If he could have taken that Emperor action earlier, but then I guess he couldn't have shoved as many troops out. Yeah, tough situation for Ron. He's just literally limited by, I mean, if he had those 2 troops that the Emperor had given him and somehow had found a way to put them into play, which I don't think was possible, maybe he could have gotten there. And maybe actually that answers my question about the swordsman. Maybe he got the swordsman because he needed the way to have multiple actions on this last round to give him a chance to catch up. Gray somehow scored 3 points there, so maybe he had some intrigue card that says like win a battle and score another point or something like that. That's going to put him way over the top there, so I don't need to know the tiebreaker rules. It seems like no one else moved up for endgame points, it looks like, so that's it. Gray's going to end up winning this game and really demonstrated that speed infrastructure, there is a cost at getting the Swordmaster, but he's the only player that really did it early, collected a lot of money, and then immediately pivoted to High Council, which I thought seemed weird at the time, but he showed that with those 3 actions, you can just draw extra cards to make up the difference for having to use your cards for the Swordmaster, and still managed to buy those Spice Must Flows, and then just essentially he scored 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 off of the Allegiance tracks, and then just made his points through that Spice Must Flow, and then that final conflict there, and one of his intrigue cards really took advantage of the intrigue cards. I'm sure that he is pretty happy with the cards that he ended up drawing this game, and that's going to do it for us. Thank you very much for watching. We're going to come back with another video pretty soon. I've got a whole day ahead of me. I'm going to do some extra recording, so we're headed to Raw next, but that was really fun, and I will probably jump to doing the Dune Imperium Grand Final very soon, so I keep this fresh in my mind. But here we're at. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.